With that, say amen. Amen. Have you ever had a time in your life where maybe you had to find joy in like a really tough situation? Like, think about that for a second. Have you ever had a moment in your life? I know that you guys have, because listen, it is not easy being a middle or high school student. It's not. It's really not. Like, just living within culture, it's not like an easy thing to do. It's really not easy to like live a life for Christ, like when maybe some of the people around you aren't living a life for Christ. Like, it makes it difficult, right? And so maybe though, it just in any situation, you've had a difficult situation where you had to try to bring joy out of it. Anybody raise your hand real quick if you agree with me? One time. Let's go. All right, so I'm not alone. Cool. I had one recently, and Miss Tiff doesn't know this, but she's going to know it right now. It's all good. So yesterday, right? Yesterday. Oh my gosh, yesterday. We were at our house. We got home from work, and we're chilling. We had dinner, and Miss Serenity, wave at everybody real quick. Say hi. Miss Serenity came over and helped Miss Tiffany with a bunch of VBS stuff, right? Like, Miss Tiff is like, you know, she's not that tall, but she's like up to here, you know what I mean, in VBS stuff. So it's not really not that long, but anyways, she's up to her here in like VBS stuff, and so Serenity came over and helped her with some cutting paper. I don't know, they're doing arts and crafts, finger painted, so it was crazy. And so they're doing this stuff, and so before Serenity gets there though, my wife comes to me, and she says, "Hey," like just like that. And she goes, "I made cookies."
Oh, this.
I'm like, "You don't say." "What kind?" She's like, "Chocolate chip, and then they're Reese's. It's like peanut butter cookies." Y'all, come on. One time, peanut butter cookies with chocolate chips, and I'm like, "Hello?" And so she comes to me, she's like, "I made cookies," and I'm like, "Okay, this is really good. This is going great. This is a great Tuesday. We're off to a good start." And so anyways, Serenity is like pulling in our driveway, right? Like their car's pulling in our driveway, and we're like, okay, they're here. And like, I'm trying to get our dogs like in the other room because like they're two little terriers and they want to like kiss your face, but they're this tall, you know what I mean? So it's like it's hard. Anyways, they'll try to jump, and so I'm like, no, like get in here. I'm like herding chickens. I'm trying to put them in the bedroom. It's terrible. It's really inexperienced. Y'all should come over and try it one time. And so like I'm trying to get them in the bedroom, and like they're getting close to coming in the door or whatever. And so Miss Tiff is like, "The cookies just got out of the oven, and I'm gonna do something, whatever." And so she takes them out of the oven and she puts them on the stove top, right? And so they're on like this little, you know what wax paper is? Like you bake with like wax paper, right? Any of y'all bake? Carly Jo, raise your hand. Okay, I know you know. I know you know. And so she's got like this wax paper that she put in the baking pan, and it's on the stove top. And so I'm excited. You have to understand, I'm not excited because Serenity's coming over. I'm excited because there are cookies in the oven. And I'm like, "Yeah, I gave me the cookie, yeah." And so I'm waiting, I'm actually waiting, I'm getting the dogs, I'm wrangling the chickens, whatever. And I come back in here, and all I hear is like, "Yeah!" And I'm like, what just happened in my house? Like, she just killed a dog or something. I don't know. Like, what happened? Like, somebody died. Something happened. And so I walk around the corner. She goes, "Don't come in here! Don't walk!" And she's like freaking out, having a spaz attack. And so I walk through the living room by our like little coffee machine, and I look around, and she is like on the floor on her knees, with the fridge open, and she's like. And so now I'm crying because I peek around and I see the tray of cookies on our kitchen floor, crumpled up in pieces. Listen to me, we're gonna have an altar service right now, okay? I'm still hurt over it. And so she is on the ground and she's like, "The cookies!" And I'm like, "Why though? Why'd you try to do that?" She's like, "I did it the day before and it worked fine." I'm like, "It didn't work now? Like, hello? Like, we should have tried something else, like use the pan." I don't know. And so, y'all, you have to understand really quick, okay? I was excited. I was really, really excited. And so I had to find joy in a really difficult situation. You wanna know what the joy is? They tasted just the same broken up on the floor as they did coming out of the oven, so it's all good. Like, so my joy was that, like, listen, I ate that bad boy. You better believe I ate that thing. But listen, whether it was cookies or not, listen, for you guys as middle and high school students, for me as an adult, like there are times where we encounter like difficult things. Like there are difficult circumstances, there are difficult situations that come about in our life. Most of the time, they're like unexpected and you didn't like go out and seek them out. You know what I'm saying? I didn't walk in the living room and be like, "Hey babe, you know, it'd be really cool if you drop these cookies on the ground right now." You know what I mean? Like, I didn't go do that. I didn't seek that out. Like, but there are like actual real life things. I make jokes about like dropping cookies on the floor. But there are like real life things that go on in our lives that are like unexpected, they're unwelcome, but like they occur. And so for you and I as young believers, what we have to understand is this, and what we have to actually try to consider is like, how do we handle those things? Like, how do I handle the things that are like unexpected or unwelcome in our moments? How do I walk in those moments? Better yet, how do I walk in those moments still trying to reflect Jesus in all I say, think, and do? If you guys were with us a couple weeks ago, we did an Imago Dei series, which just means image of God. If you guys don't understand this, in Scripture it says you are made in God's image. Ephesians 2 says that you are his workmanship, his masterpiece. You are loved and cherished and created on purpose, with purpose, for a purpose. Every single one of you in this room right now. But how do we continue to walk and live like in the image of God when difficult or like unwelcome things happen in our lives? And that's what we're going to talk about tonight a little bit. In James chapter 1, if you guys have a Bible, you can flip to that. We're just going to go right through James 1. If you don't own a Bible at all, come see me right after service before you leave. I will physically give you a Bible out of my office tonight. But if you don't have one with you, it's on the screen behind me. And it's in James 1, starting in verse 2 through 4. And this is what it says. It says, "Dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind," everybody say any kind. Any kind. Troubles of any kind come your way, listen. He says, consider it an opportunity for great joy. I guarantee you, if you and I had a conversation and we're back here playing carpet ball, and I said, hey bro, what do you do when you experience like great trials? What do you do when you experience like really difficult situations in your life? Like what happens when like this thing happens in your family? What happens when your best friend said this about you behind your back and like now you lost all your friends? Like what happens when that occurs in your life? I guarantee you don't come to me and you be like, you know what I do? I consider it great joy. I guarantee none of us are going to say that as people. Because that's not our immediate reaction. But James says this. He says, consider it an opportunity for great joy. He says, because you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let it grow, not let it go, let it grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing. You guys can write this down in your notes. This is what we're talking about. Like true Christians, like devoted, dedicated Christians, you as a committed follower of Jesus, we overcome trials and temptations in our lives. The first one is this, with joy and patience. With joy and patience. That word trials, there's like a Greek word for it, right? It's literally, I'm going to butcher it, but it's like parasmos, something like that. But this is what it means, right? That's the word. But trials literally means it refers to an unwelcome or unexpected experience. Like an unwelcome, unexpected occurrence that happens in our lives. But joy, this is the definition of joy, right? It means an extended state of well-being, joy is not an immediate feeling of happiness or pleasure. You know what gives me happiness? Ice cream. Ice cream never did anything wrong to me. I always have room for ice cream. Why? Because it makes me happy. I like ice cream. I like sports. Sports bring me happiness. They bring me joy. They like not joy, but they bring me like happiness and pleasure. I enjoy it, right? But joy is an extended state of well-being. Another translation of this verse in James 1, 2 through 4 says, have nothing but joy. Y'all ever go through your day and think that like, bro, you know what I have? I have nothing but joy. Now you got stress and anxiety and depression and like whatever. You got homework, you got exams, you got finals, you know what I'm saying? We don't always go through life and say, you know what I have? I have nothing but joy. Another way of saying it is like this. It says supreme joy. Consider it supreme joy when you face trials of many kinds. If you and I got together right now, we went to Busch Gardens, right? How many of you like roller coasters? Raise your hand again. We've done this before. Raise your hand. A couple of you guys. Cool. If we went to Busch Gardens right now and we were like, hey bro, let's go ride Montu. I love Montu. It was the first roller coaster I ever rode. I love Montu, right? Let's go. So if me and Ethan and Ashley come too, right? You can just tag along, whatever. You can hop on my backpack or something, I don't know. Yeah. And so we went and we're like, hey bro, we're gonna go ride Montu, right? Because I enjoy it. It's fun. Like it brings me some happiness, right? So like if we went and we got on Montu and we rode Montu, like bro, it's gonna make me happy because it's fun, right? Like we enjoy it. We're gonna have a good time doing that. But you know what's gonna happen? 90 seconds later, the ride's going to end and you're going to get off. Maybe you ride it again because if you go to Montu and you ride at Busch Gardens, you know you can basically hop back in line and get back on again, right? You just ride it back to back. You can do that. You can go ride another ride. You can go to Cobra's Curse, which is right there by you. You can go and do that. And you're going to have a good time. You're going to have fun. It's going to bring you like some level of happiness or pleasure. But you know what's going to happen? Eventually, you're going to drive home. You know what's at home? The same family issues that you've been facing. The same issue and fights you've been having with your siblings. The same relational issues you're having amongst your friends. The things that cause you stress and anxiety, or the unwelcome, unexpected things that happen in life. When you get out of Busch Gardens and you go back home, you know what's going to not bring you joy anymore? That roller coaster ride. Why? Because it was temporary. That is happiness. That is not joy. James is talking about joy. He says, hey, when you as a follower of Jesus, when you are experiencing this unwanted, unexpected, difficult scenario, he's saying it's not going to bring you temporary happiness, and it's not meant to. But he says this, he says, but let it bring you long-term joy. Understanding that troubles and trials, that's what he says, right? Later in that verse, it says that, knowing that when your faith is tested, your endurance, you can now endure these difficult things. You can now endure these difficult situations that come up in your life. Why? Because you have allowed God to develop your faith in it. So he says, have joy, knowing, the understanding that God has a purpose in it. We may not experience immediate happiness, and because we're human, right? We're human people. You're not expected to feel happy when things don't go right, but we can have a long-term perspective of joy because God is working on our faith to make sure that it endures and it lasts. So many young people, guys, listen. So many students that you know, friends you have, people that are in your circle of influence, people that are in your classes. You can have conversations with them and maybe they say, yeah, I used to go to church. And my parents got a divorce, so I stopped going. Yeah, I used to go to church, and I lost my grandma, and she used to go to church, and so now I don't believe anymore. What happens is this, especially for you at your age, something difficult happens in our lives, and we immediately blame God. And so we think, oh man, a bad thing happened in my life. Something went wrong in my life. Something was unexpected or unwelcome in my life, and we go, it's God's fault. And we walk away from God, and it's not God's fault. But God is trying to use those difficult things in your life to develop this endurance in your faith. And it says that if you do that, eventually you will be perfect, lacking nothing. Because that endurance has a chance to grow. James is saying, don't let trials or unexpected things happening in your life make you think you did something wrong. Instead, God uses that for a purpose. I think this is on your notes. You can write it down. It says, as Christians, we should consider trials with joy, knowing that long-term it helps us to become more mature followers of Jesus. More mature followers of Jesus. Second thing is this, write this down. I think Christians, as young believers, we overcome trials and difficulties with wisdom from God. With wisdom from God. Because it's James, and it's in verse 5, we're just going right along here in chapter 1. In verse 5, it says, if you need wisdom, ask. It says, if you need wisdom, ask our generous God, and he will give it to you. It says he will not rebuke you for asking, but when you ask him, be sure that your faith is in God alone. Don't waver, because a person with divided loyalty is as unsettled as a wave of the sea that is blown and tossed by the wind. Saying don't tell me that you believe in God. Don't tell me that you have faith in God. Don't tell me you're asking God for wisdom, but then go and try to find it somewhere else. Saying you're unsettled just as much as the wind getting tossed, or the wave getting tossed by the wind. Don't tell me you believe and have faith, but then try to find wisdom somewhere else. Such people should not expect to receive anything from the Lord because their loyalty is divided between God and the world, and they are unstable in everything they do. But James says, if you need it, ask for it. Because God is generous. That word wisdom, the definition of that, we're just going to give you all kinds of definitions, it's great. The definition of that means this. It refers to knowledge of God's plans and purposes and the ability to live our lives knowing that. Like, anybody in here ever think, like, you know what? I really wish I knew, like, God's plan for my life. Like, you ever think, like, man, I really would like to know God's purposes for my life. I would really like to know the reason for my being as an 11th grade student or an 8th grade student. Like, man, I really wish I knew the reason for, like, these difficult things that are happening in and around my life. Why do those keep happening? I think that all the time, but this is what we need. We need wisdom. We don't need advice from the kid in our 7th period who has never known the things of God in his life. Like, he's going to give you worldly advice. You know what I mean? We need wisdom from God. When we have wisdom from God, wise people can discover the identity and the purpose of trials and understand how to overcome them. Wisdom helps trials, students. But that is something that God offers us. And James is saying, he's saying God is the supplier of wisdom. Like, hey, like, do you need wisdom? Cool. Like, that's fine. Like, get off Amazon, get off Walmart. Like, it's not there. Like if you need wisdom, like, come to God for wisdom. You guys know where we get wisdom from? God's word and through prayer. He's like, if you need wisdom, ask for it. Like go to God in prayer, ask him for wisdom. And then James says this, he says, if you need wisdom, God doesn't hold anything in your life against you that happened before. God isn't holding a grudge against you. You feel like, man, I've messed up too many times. Bro, I stepped away too long. I feel like I'm too far away from God. I feel like I've never been close enough. Like, I've done these things. I've been in sin. I have this darkness happening in my life. I've had some crazy thoughts. You are never too far anything for God to A, love you, and B, be able to offer you wisdom, it says right here in Scripture. He gives it freely to you, students, if you will seek him for it. It says, ask God for wisdom and then count it joy, because that wisdom will help you see how the unexpected thing can be used by God to make you a more mature follower of Christ. What happens is this. I'm going to give you the third thing. We're going to try to hurry so we can get in small groups. But what happens is this. A lot of times we just have the wrong perspective on things. We're looking at it for the wrong reasons. We're looking at it with the wrong lens. We're not seeing it like God sees that thing. But here's the third thing. We overcome trials with the right perspective. With the right perspective. If you look at verse 9 through 11, it says this. It says, believers who are poor have something to boast about, for God has honored them. And those who are rich should boast or brag that God has humbled them. They will fade away like a little flower in the field. The hot sun rises and the grass withers. The little flower droops and falls, and its beauty fades away. But in the same way, the rich will fade away with all of their achievements. In the land of Israel, there were these little flowers, these very beautiful flowers, but they would bloom and they would spring to life, but only for a short time. The rains would come in that area, and they would bring rain, and it would fall, and it would nourish these flowers, this beautiful variety of flowers, and they would burst to life, and they were gorgeous. But then the rains would leave, and over time they would get scorched out by the sun, and then they begin to fade and turn brown and die and wither and wilt, and they would be gone. He's talking about this, and James is using these flowers as an illustration for like riches of the world, but also for like the rich, wealthy man as well. He's saying like the riches of this world are going to fade away, but so will the man who has great riches or wealth. He's saying it doesn't last. It's so temporary. It's such a short-lived thing. Like wealth won't last. If we put our life and our identity in the things that fade away, we will fade away also. If that's where our identity is rooted, we will eventually fade away. James is saying in verse 9 through 11, he's saying just as the flower of the field passes away, he's saying the trials and the difficulties that we experience sometimes serve to remind those that think they have it all. That reminds those who think that we're really, really comfortable in life, that we have everything together. Those things serve as a reminder that this is still only this life. Students, the life we live right now, the 70, 80, 90, I hope some of you live to 110. Those years, though, in the span of eternity, look like this. You could live to 120, and your life here on earth looks like that in the scope of eternity. This life is short. This life is temporary, and the things in this life fade. So James is saying, he's like, if you put your identity, if you put who you are and what you trust in and what you value, if it's in temporary riches and wealth and things that are going to fade away, he's saying you're going to fade away too. It's temporary. If a man, listen, I heard this quote, he says, if a man is only rich in this world, when he dies, he leaves and loses his riches. But if a man is rich before God, when he dies, he goes to his riches. I'm going to give you the fourth thing. We're closing on. We'll just pray here in just a second. The last one is this. Christians overcome like trials and tough times, understanding temptation. Verse 12 in James chapter 1 still, it says this. It says, God blesses those who patiently endure testing and temptation. Afterward, they will receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love him. It says, and remember, when you're being tempted, don't say, God is tempting me. God is never tempted to do wrong, and he never tempts anyone else. It says this, temptation comes from our own selfish desires, which entice, entrap us, and drag us away. And it says, these desires give birth to sinful actions, and when sin is allowed to grow, it gives birth to death. I don't know if you guys ever heard somebody say this or not, but sometimes you'll hear somebody say, like, going through a tough time, or they're struggling with something, or they're wrestling with something, or they just had an unexpected, unwelcome, occurrence in their life. And they'll be like, man, I really don't know why God's like trying you with this. Or they'll say like, man, I'm struggling with this so much, or like I'm dealing with this thing, and man, my family continues to be broken, and man, I just really don't know why God is testing me like this, why this thing is happening. I don't know why God's doing that. James is saying this. He says he knew that the people had an evil tendency to blame God for the things that happened. That's our go-to, and we talked about that earlier. But James knew people had a tendency when they find themselves in trials or difficult situations, but by God's nature, you have to understand this, students, God cannot be tempted, and he cannot tempt someone with evil, because he is holy. He cannot have relationship with sin. It is not in him. He said, but instead, temptation comes from our own desires. When we find ourselves fighting temptation to sin, it says God is not tempting us. Temptation comes from our own desires, which trap us and drag us away. Temptation comes when we are led away from the things of God by our own fleshly or natural desires. We get trapped and enticed, it says, by the things in and around our world. Like the enemy, which is Satan, there is a real enemy. His name is Satan, and he wants to destroy you and lead you away from the things of God. He does. So he tempts and entices and traps us. What happens is this, though. Satan's great strategy, students, listen to me, I can help you with a lot of the things that go on in your life. Satan's great strategy is this. He will try to tempt you with something that looks like it is going to offer you goodness and pleasure. But if you know what John 10:10 says, it says that the enemy can only steal, kill, and destroy. He can never offer you. He is the master of deception. He is the master of evil. And so he will present things to us that entice us and trap us by our own fleshly desires that look like they're going to bring us pleasure and joy and goodness. But it says in John 10 that he can only steal, kill, and destroy. That's the only thing he can offer you. And James says when we give into sin, the ultimate result of sin is natural consequences and spiritual death. So I'm just going to ask you this. So you bow your head and close your eyes. We're going to end with this. And we're going to go into small groups. But listen to me. If temptation's aim is to take our natural desires, our selfish desires, our sinful nature, and trap us and entice us and present something that looks good to us, if the goal of sin is to lead us away from the things of God, how and why would God ever tempt you with something that is trying to lead you away from himself? I want you to hear this, students. We have to live with the proper understanding.